Good morning. In my opinion, two of the most present and urgent topics worth closer examination in this world of business and marketing and media and data are value and intelligence, seemingly unconnected to each other. But in fact, if we start with value, it's no news that there's a direct link between the value of companies that we have inside this very room today and the value of companies that are floating soon on the stock markets with the value of personal information that is stored. There's a direct proportion, to such an extent actually, from greater insights, from deeper data sets, through to more ability to target, thus increasing advertising and media revenues, has led to some inclusions of terminology like the black gold of the 21st century. None of this is news, of course. But actually, the more you look at it, you realize actually that there is a significant difference between bigger and better. Does more volume mean more meaning? Do more numbers mean more context or more value? Is bigger better? Interestingly, of course, in the media industry, we have the two principles of reach and specificity. And at the end of the day, specificity in many cases actually limits reach. And when our tuning of our engines is actually volume-based, reach evidently beats the specificity. And we do chase down the larger numbers versus the more specific context. This, by the way, isn't necessarily down to the immaturity of our collective thinking. No, in fact, this is down to our engineering and down to our regulations. Today is definitely by our design. We have a dichotomy between a situation where the most valuable information is actually the most private. So do we, A, find more clever ways of finding more private information? Do we get more sneaky? Or do we, B, find more meaningful ways of creating trust-based relationships so that information is freely exchanged with a mutual value incentive? The reality, of course, is that even if we did find more clever ways of finding information, we live in a world where it is assumed now that around 50% of online profiles are fictitious, and even more contain elements of incorrect information. So one has to argue, if we did actually choose option A and find more clever ways of finding information, would we be finding information that actually makes sense to us? More so, actually, we're entering a cross-section where, and you may have suspected this inside yourselves as well, coming into this conference today, where we actually end up with a mandatory requirement for optimal value to be through the creation of trusted relationships and the creation of things that matter and mean something and actually have mutuality in them. Less of a campaign tactic now, but trust, meaning, and mutuality actually being a strategic requirement for optimal value. Is actually this summarized in the fact that to create optimal value, we need to do so in a way without the expense of personal privacy? Would it be such an extent, actually, that where our fortunes lie in this data landscape are in the areas of how well we treat people with the respect? Maybe that's becoming more mandatory now, rather than in years gone by, the nice pipe dream of being kind of warm and fuzzy. Is this an inconvenient truth? Possibly. Is this a significant opportunity? I very much think so. But before we look at that significant opportunity, I want to talk to you about intelligence. It comes as no surprise that we live in an exciting time in terms of the cleverness of our computers. Actually, right now, we're in a situation where change is so fast and so rapid, the only thing we can predict is that today is as slow as change is ever going to get. But this, by the way, isn't a 2012 exclusive concept. In fact, all the way back in 1847, Thornton, when commenting on the four-function mechanical calculator at the time, said this fantastic quote: "Who knows that such machines, when brought to greater perfection, may not think of a plan to remedy all their own defects, and then grind out ideas beyond the ken of mortal mind. 1847, let's spin it forward to my personal hero, Alan Turing, who said in 51, once the machine thinking method has started, it would not take long to outstrip our feeble powers. At some stage, therefore, we should have to expect the machines to take control. Let's spin it forward even further. To Vernor Vinge in 1993, the opening sentence of the book, The Coming Technological Singularity, How to Survive in the Post-Human Era, starts with this fairly blatant and brash statement. Within 30 years, we will have the technological means to create superhuman intelligence. Shortly after, the human era will be ended. It's what the cool kids speak about. To be honest, if I didn't say I was going to mention it, I probably wouldn't have been invited. The singularity is where the cool conversations are happening right now. How clever our machinery can get, how smart our objects can be, to such an extent that maybe even we can automate media planning and buying. Who knew? And actually what I notice is that in all of this technological advancement, we seem to be only taking one part of the chariots of Plato's time. We seem to be concentrating on development of things that are clever in terms of logic, but not necessarily clever in terms of emotion. In the same way as reach beats specificity, in most of the machinery that we build, logic is beating emotion. Hard science, in the pillars where we had reach and specificity of media, in the science world of hard science and soft science, hard beats soft. And in fact, soft often gets in the way of the hard. Is this because of our collective immaturity of thought? No. This is due to our engineering and due to our regulations. Today is by our design. And we have this dichotomy where, in fact, due to this, the concentration of the hard and the logical, we end up with this situation where malevolence is high risk due to the lack of benevolence. Terminator doesn't seem too much like science fiction the more you spin that forward. So we have two choices. Do we, A, find more clever ways of policing this technological brilliance that we have in our hands and our pockets right now? Or do we, B, find more meaningful ways of it to develop? Well, to look at those two options as before, you could say that Kurzweil says that in 17 years' time, the human brain actually will be on par, or rather the technology will be on par with the processing capability of the human brain. So you could say that actually option A may be slightly too late. So you may feel actually that we're at this crossroads, we're at an interchange where there's now a mandatory requirement for optimal value in intelligence to be based around creating trust on matters that mean things, with mutuality in exchange. Less of a campaign tactic, and more of a mandatory requirement now, strategically, in our thinking. You could go as far as to say, in fact, that, of course, value creation needs to be without the expense of surrendering emotion. Is this an inconvenient truth? Very possibly. Significant opportunity? Absolutely. And it's exactly the same opportunity, by the way, as value in data. The same opportunity exists. However, in terms of the inconvenient truths, what I've just said puts into question, in some extent, the valuations of today, the predictions of today, the decisions of today. Because everything I've said is the antithesis, actually, of how a lot of the value in data looks and the valuations of company looks. But let's look at the more opportunistic side of things. I see a massive white space for meaningful innovation, for societal betterment, some form of human holism that isn't chasing down willingly the end of the human era, and isn't determinedly sacrificing the rights of individual identity for commercial, corporate, internal gain. Does this sound a bit tofu eating, panda hugging? Maybe so. Holistic purpose, holistic meaning, societal betterment, it seems very soft and warm and fuzzy to me. But the logic I've just laid out actually requires this, rather than creates a choice for us. Let me give you 3 examples. How about if, alongside our minimum revenue guarantees, we had minimum user experience guarantees? How about, actually, we had some form of mandatory social responsibility inside our augmented and artificial intelligence creation? How about, actually, we had a co-authored, human, collaborative constitution for the hyperreal generations moving forward? All of this might sound like science fiction, but actually it's just asking us to actually think about it as humans rather than as machines. Oh, the irony. In fact, if we look at where the potential is in terms of planning and prediction and research and development and innovation and commerce, in terms of profit and in terms of revenue, in terms of learning and insight and iteration, the absolute epitome of what success would look like is the merging of the hard and the big and the logical and the soft and the contextual and the emotional. In summary, there are 2 things. On one hand, in the data game, there is a strong argument to harmonize human rights with our enthusiasm for exploitation. And on the intelligence side and the technological development side, I believe there is a need to harmonize societal benefit with our eagerness to end the human era. In fact, if I were to summarize where the actual gold, the black gold is, I would say it is in this equation on the screen. It's just the top bit. It's kind of quite difficult. I'm going to leave you with 3 things that you could do today, this afternoon, tomorrow morning, that I believe would future-proof you in as best way as you possibly could, bearing in mind that no one can predict the future. The first would be this. You could overlay a map of what your corporate needs are, of what you're trying to do in your agency, in your brand, in your company, in your organization. Overlay that map onto a map of what human needs are in societies and regions, fundamental needs, and see where the white spaces are. See where the borders are. See where the dots are that could be connected. Secondly, you could establish in what you do what the fundamental value is. Not the transient value, but the fundamental value, i.e., what is it that you do or could do that would have an absolute impact on people's lives? Do you think that your business isn't in the game of doing that? Because it is, even as a conduit. And the third thing is to courageously build those fundamentals out. And I say the word courageously because everything I've said actually is not necessarily in tune with the way that business is supposed to be done. But for the reasons I laid out, I'd bet my career on the fact that it's the way that businesses that succeed will be done. And that requires courage, determines who's going to win and who's not. That word. Courageously build on those fundamentals. I believe actually in the room here today, we will have the brightest stars of the future of the media industry. The Festival of Media in 3 years' time or 4 years' time, I think this conversation that we're having right now will be remembered as old school thinking because now it's just the way business is done. Of course we actually build what we do from fundamental needs outwards. Of course our business is in the business of meaning something and mattering. Of course it is. How could a business not be in today's world? Brands are democratized. Our solid lines around our companies are now porous. We have dotted lines where there were absolute circles. The only thing that you could feel good at moving forward in doing in terms of confidence is to matter. then what we do next, once you actually matter, becomes a sideline conversation. And the future is extraordinarily bright for those that actually mean something moving forward right now. I'd love to know how it goes. Please get in touch. Namaste.
Many thanks to Jonathan for, at a minimum, a very thought-provoking opening. As I said earlier, please do use the Twitter feed if there are questions or observations you want to make about anything the speakers say. I'd just like to ask one question to Jonathan, which is that most of us in this room are still working in an industry which is pretty much the same in some ways that it was 20 years ago in terms of the concepts of profit margins, agency commissions, cost per impact. You know, we all understand that we're going through a period of very radical change, but actually, many of the things about the industry are very similar. How much risk is there, do you think, that what we do for a living is going to be fundamentally changed and disaggregated by the impact that digital is having on social media and the way people work and live? How much change?
I think as a pragmatist and a cynical optimist, I think that actually the fundamental change has already happened. The future's already here, it's just not necessarily widely distributed. I think that every single person in this room will know that there are things happening to P&Ls and business lines and business decisions and strategies that don't look like they used to. The amount of nodded heads, I think, resonates. I think the level of fundamental change in our business is the only thing that I could predict, but I don't believe that we necessarily need to scrap everything that we're doing right now and start all over again. When we have businesses with legacy inside and staff with families inside and products in the marketplace, we need to, with some awareness, move forward in the best way we can, but in an agile enough way so that we can learn and sense and respond from what we do. So in the good old days of big strategy, big idea, big launch, big move, we're now in the world of little strategy, little iteration, little move. And actually, if we can do that and sense and respond, that agility will place us in the best possible way forward, because change is the only thing that we can predict.
Jonathan, thank you very much.